Peace and love. This is Brother Faheem, and you are now tuned in to the Lead with Logic podcast. You know the vibes. Welcome back, y'all. Man, it's been a minute since I've been in it, but I'm always trying to win it. Life is always moving at that fast pace, and I'm just trying to win the race. Man, I want to introduce a new series that I'm gonna start on here. It's called a literary file. And basically, in the literary files, what I'll be doing is taking a book, a different book. Maybe you know it, maybe you don't know it. Going through it, analyzing it, breaking it down. Again, adding that knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that will help advance your life. Because when you think about leading with logic, you want to reference something, right? You want to reference something other than just emotion, other than just feelings, other than something that's subjective or just the way you feel, right? You want to reference something with some sort of rational, logical meaning or benefit. So what I always try to do is I always try to draw from these references, draw from these sources that are documented, that are literary, and move from that space. So that's what we'll be doing. For the first book, it's none other than Minister Malcolm X. It's only befitting that I use Malcolm first. I always accredit Malcolm as being my entry point into consciousness because I can remember being a small child, being so excited, being so, you know, just ecstatic about the X movie coming out. And I had never really been exposed to Malcolm. I had never really known who he was, but his stature as a god, how he walked, how he talked, how he engaged his brothers and sisters in the community. Man, it was always so impressionable. And it was always, even to this day, it made such a huge impact because Malcolm, is the standard. He's one of the standards for manhood for us. So yeah, it's only befitting that I start with Malcolm X, Minister Malcolm X. So this is the literary files, y'all. A little bit of a different ambiance too. But nonetheless, I said I was gonna start with Minister Malcolm. And this is his book. This is one of the books. Listen, it's so many books written about Malcolm. It's so many, so many by all different authors, by all different philosophers, for lack of better terms, different paradigms, Pan Africanist, Black nationalist, members in the Nation of Islam, the gods and the earths. Everybody has a Malcolm or a version of Malcolm that they like to discuss or share. And what I want to do is I want to kind of share the Malcolm that I know, but also get different perspectives of Malcolm, perspectives that are oftentimes overlooked because that will complete the cipher or to complete the photo or at least the understanding of Malcolm, right? So I'm gonna be reading out a few books and I'll be introducing them. But the first is the autobiography of Malcolm X. It's a real quick snippet. This is what Malcolm had to say. It's only fitting that we hear from our brother to start it off. He says, anyway, now each day I live as if I'm already dead. And I tell you what I would like for you to do. When I am dead, I say it that way because from the things I know, I do not expect to live long enough to read this book in its finished form. I want you to just watch out and see if I'm not right in what I say. That the white man in his press is going to identify me with hate. He will he will make use of me dead as he has made use of me alive, as a convenient symbol of hatred, and that will help him to escape facing the truth that all I've been doing is holding up a mirror to reflect to show the history of unspeakable crimes that his race has committed against my race. You watch, I will be labeled as, at best, an irresponsible black man. I have always felt about this accusation that the black leader whom white men consider to be responsible is invariably the black leader who never gets any results. Pause. When you think about that, Malcolm was really telling us, listen, if your enemy is approving of your leader, there's a problem. And he's only doing that. She's only doing that because it's not in the best interest of the people. It's in the best interest of them that's approving. right? And when you look at our leaders today, do they have our best interests? And how do you know? Like Malcolm said, do they get results? Are there tangible results that you can point to? Not just symbolic victories. That's, we have to be able to point to something tangible. Our children can't eat. Now they can be president. Our children can't eat. Now they have the right to do as they want to do. Our children can't eat. I just want an opportunity. We need results, tangible results. So you only get action as a black man if you are regarded by the white man as irresponsible. And in fact, this much I learned when I was just a little boy. And since I have been some kind of leader of black people here in the race society of America, I've been more reassured each time the white man resisted me or attacked me harder, because each time made me more certain that I was on the right track in the American black man's best interest. The racist white man's opposition automatically made me know that if I did offer the black man something, that I that I did offer the black man something worthwhile. So Malcolm took pride in being contested by the power structure, because he understood they would only contest him because he was actually absolutely making a dent. He was doing something meaningful. So that's what our dear brother had to say. Now, let's hear what the power structure had to say. This is a great read. This is called The FBI Files. You all should get this. It's by Claiborne Carson. Introduction by Spike Lee, by the way. So this is the FBI memorandum. And you all have probably heard this. It's entitled Malcolm in the American State. For maximum effectiveness of the counterintelligence program, y'all should look that up, the COINTELPRO, and how they affected the black community at large in the 50s and 60s. For maximum effectiveness of the counterintelligence program and to prevent wasted effort, long-range goals are being set. 1. Prevent the coalition of black militant black nationalist groups. In unity, there is strength, a truism that is no less valid for all its triteness. An effective coalition of black nationalist groups might be the first step toward a real Mao in America, the beginning of a true black revolution. The Mau Mau were a Kenyan rebel group that were fighters. You should look the Mau Mau up. 2. To prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad all aspire to this position. Elijah Muhammad is less of a threat because of his age. King could be a very real contender for the position should he abandon his supposed obedience to white liberal doctrines, nonviolence, and embrace black nationalism. So they understood the significance of Mr. Malcolm X. Elijah Muhammad was absolutely a threat, but he was older and they understood that would come with problems. Dr. King he could have galvanized his following because it was huge, right? And Dr. King wasn't really the leader of the civil rights movement. He was merely the spokesperson. But they understood as long as he was speaking about civil disobedience and the white liberal rhetoric, he could be controlled, right? Just as today, as long as people like Cornel West, as long as people like Eric Mike, what is his name? Eric Michael Dyson, I want to say is his name. As long as people are spewing these political affiliated rhetorics that are not in our best interest, then you can be controlled. And that's how you see that was how the FBI viewed Dr. King. Dr. King made a huge dent. He made a mark. He did, and I respect him. But I understand he wasn't really a threat because he wasn't really necessarily affecting power. That's all I'm trying to say. So, but Minister Malcolm, they understood he had the charisma, they understood he had the courage, and they understood most of all, he had the backing in the Nation of Islam. When he was in the Nation of Islam, he had the backing, and that made him dangerous. And he had an international appeal, and it was no coincidence that he had that appeal because his father was a Garveyite. So Malcolm was trained for what he did, and that's what we're going to get to. So yeah, I just want to really start y'all off with those two books, what Malcolm said and what the power structure said. Again, if y'all didn't catch it, it's the autobiography of Malcolm X and also the FBI files, which y'all should pick up when y'all get a chance. Now, A lot of times, what I don't like about figures, historical figures, is we're always given an interpretation of the figure, meaning scholars and academics, they do expansive and extensive research, but a lot of times it's still their interpretation, right? Now, you have first person, second person, third person, all these different accounts, right? So when you have all these different accounts, it allows you to paint a more full picture of whatever your subject matter is, whatever your cipher is. It'll give you a broader look at it. What's missing, or maybe not, what's not magnified, is the people that are close to your subject matter or your case study. For me, what I'm doing is I chose books on Minister Malcolm that were the voices of people who were close to him, right? Not just scholars who were not close, but not close, but observing him. I wanted to get people who were right there with Malcolm. I wanted to get people who were, had talked to him, people who were close to him, people who had talked to him, people who really engaged with Malcolm, people who really knew him and loved him. I think that's how we get in their absence. If you're not going to take the first person or their word, it's good to take a third person account from somebody who was very, very close. So the book that I, went through and read through for the night is The Seventh Child. The Seventh Child. Yeah. A family memoir of Malcolm X. So this is Malcolm's family. And it's Rodnell Collins with A. Peter Bailey. Now, Peter Bailey worked with Malcolm in the AAU, the OAAU, Organization of African American Unity, and also I think he had some dealings with the Muslim Mosque Inc. Primarily those OAAU, because Peter Bailey wasn't no Muslim. But Rodnell Collins is one of his sisters. His father had children before him. His father had 3 children before he met Louise Little, and one of his sisters' name, who was very, very instrumental in his life, was Ella. She's mentioned in the autobiography. She's mentioned in several books, and she was a super, super pivotal figure in Malcolm's life. And so this is Ella's son's account of Malcolm, and he's dealing with firsthand accounts of that he had with Malcolm, but also what his sister described. And she talked about their relationship. She talked about her relationship with her small brother, so her baby brother. So now, a couple things that we know about Malcolm in the timeline. Well, let me read this timeline. I'll share this timeline and kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about with Malcolm X. This timeline kind of goes into it. That's online, American Experience. So let's add this. So what we have here is an American Experience. This is a website, right? And it's dealing with Malcolm. 25, we know Malcolm was born in Omaha, Nebraska. 26, the Littles leave Omaha to move to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 28, they move again. And you have to remember now, they were both his parents were staunch Garveyites. His father was an itinerant minister. His mother was an editor for the Negro World, which was the media vessel for Garvey's newspaper. But he was a very strong man. He was super strong. Earl Little was. And so he had issues everywhere he went. But I'll get into that in a second. 31, Louise has a premonition about her husband. We know that story, how he goes out there, he gets sliced in half, pushed on the railroad tracks, and he's sliced into 2. Louise Little is diagnosed as mentally ill and sent to Kalamazoo State Mental Hospital, where she will stay for 26 years. That was awful. And let me pause right there. Back in those days, it wasn't just about your mental condition. It was also about your political condition too. What do I mean by that? A lot of people who were Black nationalists were deemed to be mentally unstable. And the USA laws weren't the same back then as they were today. They could involuntarily take you if they deemed you mentally unfit. And a lot of times, what I'm telling you is people who were put in these mental asylums, it was not just because of their mental condition. Again, it was because of maybe a political belief. It was due to a lot of things. So Malcolm's mother, while she did have it a little bit rough, there were political rumblings behind that. Remember, Malcolm, they were independent and autonomous. His family, Earl and Louise, and so they owned land. They were landowners. And I read in another book that the when the whole it was a ploy to kill Earl because they wanted the land he was on. So they were not only aware of the Littles due to their political affiliation with the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, but they were also on the radar because of their status as homeowners, right? So state places the children. Okay, this is where we pick it up. The state places the little children with various foster families, and Malcolm, who has been kicked out of school in seventh grade, is sent to a juvenile home, nearly all white community, right? Here we go, right here. Summer, Summer of 1940, 15-year-old Malcolm visits his half sister Ella Collins in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston and is entranced. I couldn't have feigned indifference if I had tried to, he later says. I didn't know the world contained as many Negroes as I saw thronging downtown Roxbury at night. February, Ella Collins gains custody of Malcolm and she moves to Boston. Over the next few years, he works a number of odd jobs as railroads and restaurants and bars, and shoe shine stands, and a jewelry store. I wanted to read that because Ella was that demonstrates just how instrumental that Ella was. Yeah, that demonstrates just how instrumental Ella was, and she helped Malcolm. And Malcolm described her as strong, just like his father, just like his father. Now, this is what I'm gonna let Malcolm speak to you guys. I'm gonna let him tell you what he thought about his sister. So, this is what Malcolm said. I've said before, this is a strong, big, black, Georgia born woman. Her domineering ways had gotten her put out of the Nation of Islam's Boston Mosque 11. They took her back, then she left on her own. And by the way, when she got put out, it was a minister over there by the name of Louis X. I think we all call him today the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Ella had started studying under Boston Orthodox Muslims. Then she founded a school where Arabic was taught. She couldn't speak it. She hired teachers who did. That's Ella. She deals in real estate and she was saving up to make the pilgrimage. Nearly all night we talked in her living room. Another thing that people don't realize about Ella that's so awesome is that Ella was the one who financed Malcolm's trips abroad. So everyone knows that when Malcolm was out of the nation, when he left the nation, right? He did a little bit of globe trotting, a little world traveling. And you also realize if you're smart, you say, wait a minute, but how could he fly all over the world and he can barely keep a shelter for him and his family? Well, that was a very insightful and legit point if you're thinking that. Malcolm had help from his sister. Ella loved him and she looked out for him at all costs. She really, really loved him. And so one more thing. It says on here, if I can find it. Okay. This paragraph right here. It was Ella who drove from Boston to New York on the fateful day of Malcolm's assassination to identify the body of her brother. It was Ella who paid his funeral and business expenses and ensured he had an Islamic janazah. It was Ella who took over his organization of African American Unity, including his project of giving 35 scholarships from Al Azhar University in Egypt and from the University of Ghana to students seeking to study abroad. What is lesser well known is that Ella was instrumental in preventing revenge attacks, which countless people offered to carry out in the aftermath of Malcolm's assassination. She was also very protective over Malcolm's legacy, sparingly calling the film portrayals and writings that emerged following his death symbolism without substance. She felt she felt his deeply held Islamic beliefs and vision were being downplayed, and his more mature political ideas had been erased with the removal of 5 chapters of the autobiography from Alex Haley's final manuscript. Now, like I said, I didn't want to make this because it's really not about Ella, but I want to give you guys context as to why it is that we're reading this book, that we're reading the book that we're reading. So now, where was I? Oh yeah, okay. So, so Malcolm's mother, who is she? Louise Little. Louise Helen Langdon Norton was her maiden name, right? And she was from the island of Grenada. She was a seamstress and housekeeper or domestic for white people, right? As a lot of our sisters were back in that day. They were domestics, right? So they worked for white people in the home of white people, often raising white people's children. This is what you didn't know. She spoke English, Spanish, and some French. Patois. Yeah, so again, that's important to know when you think about Malcolm because there's this narrative that Malcolm went to jail and learned how to read. He went to jail and he had this reawakening or this awakening. I shouldn't say I should say this awakening. He had this awakening and then he gained all this knowledge. No, Malcolm was cultivated in knowledge and love. Malcolm's people were intelligent. Malcolm's people were activists. Malcolm was primed for what he did, right? He was primed for it. She never knew her Scottish father. And again, she was hospitalized because of her political philosophy. Now, what do we know about Malcolm's father, Earl Little? Well, from Butler, Georgia, son of former slaves, completed the 3rd grade, trained as a carpenter and brick masonry, then went into the ministry as a Baptist preacher. So that makes sense. He was a carpenter, he was a masonry, he was in the carpentry and masonry. And that's how he was building houses. I'm going to read this to you, but he built a lot of the houses. So that was excellent. Back then, see, they understood trades. You know, the goal wasn't to go to college, work for some corporate company or some Fortune 500 company, and then, you know, all your intellectual prowess be extracted from your community. No, they had trades back then. They had things that they could use their hands, vocations where they could use their hands and build things. And oftentimes they built things for themselves. These were not super educated people who educated in the sense of mainstream education, higher learning, colleges. That wasn't even their focus. These were people who had 3rd grade educations. These were people who were previously farm hands. These were people who were running from tyranny in the South. But they had enough sense to know that a skill and a trade could make them a lot of money and could make them a beautiful home and a beautiful life. And that's what Earl Little understood. That's what he realized. And he was a Baptist preacher. So that's no surprise. I'll give y'all a little Easter egg. I'll give y'all a little treat. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad's father was also a minister, a Baptist preacher. So Malcolm has 10 siblings. So this is the order: Hilda, Wilfred, Filbert, Reginald, Wesley, Wavon, Robert, 3 from his father's previous marriages. Remember, I told you about that. The most notable being Ella. Yes, the most notable being Ella. So, another thing, not too long after Malcolm's imprisonment, his brother and Malcolm was locked up. Malcolm became locked up in 1946. He got locked up in 46. Now, in the movie, they tell you the cops could bust in while he was putting the conch in his hair. The jig is up, and Malcolm put his arm up. That's not how it happened. Malcolm had gotten a stolen watch and he took it to the pawn shop. Now, when he went to retrieve the watch, the police were there and they got him. And that's how he got sentenced to jail. But remember, he was dealing with some white women, Laura and her friend. And that's what they really got uh, locked up for. But nonetheless, not too long after Malcolm's imprisonment, his brother Wilford joined the Nation of Islam. Now, a good bit of Malcolm's family had joined, right? But Wilford was the first. Filbert first mentioned the family membership in the NOI while Malcolm was incarcerated. Now that is important because, again, if you just watch the film, and you should never, brothers and sisters, let me say this, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, entertainment is just, if anything, it should be like the genesis into your research, into your journey to find out about a topic. It shouldn't be the omega. It shouldn't be the end. And then you have to comb through it with a fine tooth comb because education serves two purposes: to entertain, but also to influence and persuade, be it through propaganda, right? So you have to be careful and be weary, be mindful of what you consume because you never know what the propaganda or what the alternative agenda or the alternative motive that bit of information has when people are giving it to you. So, but yeah, Malcolm's family was already heavily entrenched into the nation when he was locked up. And again, he was already primed because they were already accustomed to the Garveyite narrative and the Garveyite commentary. So they knew. So now I'm going to start reading things to you guys and breaking these points down. So I talked about Filbert wrote Malcolm. Maybe I didn't. Malcolm's brother Filbert wrote him in 48 that he discovered the natural religion of the black man. That's what he said. Well, let me go back. So this is what it says of the Littles trying to persuade or let Malcolm know what they were into. Not too long after Malcolm's imprisonment, his brother Wilford joined the Nation of Islam. I came into the Muslim movement in 1947. Wilford said, and started bringing my brothers and sisters in. We already had been indoctrinated with Marcus Garvey's philosophy, so that was just a good place for us. They didn't have to convince us we were black and should be proud or anything like that. We had learned that from our Garveyite parents. Soon, Reginald, Filbert, Hilda, and Wesley joined their older brother in the Nation of Islam. The little siblings didn't just join the nation, they became some of its most dedicated members and effective proselytizers, especially Wilford. With the support of his siblings and his wife, Ruth, he set up temples in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. Wilford also became head of Temple 1 in Detroit. Now that's significant because, excuse me, that's significant because when Malcolm gets out of jail, when he's paroled, he's paroled. He's not paroled to Boston. He's not paroled to Harlem. He's paroled to Detroit to live with his brother. So, yeah. But did you hear that? Not only were they primed through the Garveyite movement, they were a group of proselytizers. They were a group of brothers and sisters that knew the proper handling of people. They were a group of brothers and sisters who didn't mind going out fishing for their people. They were a group of brothers and sisters who loved to engage and relate. These are all things that Malcolm was master at, right? And we say nothing happens in a vacuum. Now we're learning that Malcolm didn't just appear out of nowhere. He wasn't a phenomena that just was uh, all of a sudden showed up on the scene. And he got to the scene ready. This was always my personal perspective on Malcolm and how he helped the nation and how the nation helped him. Malcolm X was to the Nation of Islam what Michael Jackson was to Motown, what little Michael Jackson was to Motown. He was already polished. He was already primed. He already knew how to perform, how to be great. Berry Gordy merely gave him a platform to explode. And it was a mutual benefit to both. It was a synergy that was unmatched, right? Michael was already the man when he got to Motown. Malcolm was already the man. He already had a mind to love his people. He already had a mind to continue with the Garveyite ideology. He already had a mind to raise black people from a dead level. But the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave him a platform. Go to Mosque 1, go to Mosque 2, go to Mosque 12, go to Mosque 25. Spread this word. I need you to proselytize it. I need you to be an effective evangelist for my words. I need you to be a I need you to be a person who's going to bring people in. And Malcolm did just that. But I just wanted to, I thought it was important that people understand that Malcolm came from a long lineage of activists, not only his parents, but his brothers and sisters. And so that kind of, it didn't kind of, it did only build on to his divinity. But what else? What else? What else? Trying to give y'all some relevant information. Like I said, this is just part one. We'll be going back. So Malcolm's family was a little bit different from other black people. And it says this. There's a reason why little family members could be somewhat bolder in their dealings with whites than most of their neighbors. That was their freedom from total economic dependence on white exploiters. Unlike most of their neighbors in turn of the century rural Georgia, the Littles weren't sharecroppers. In sharecropping, black farmers and white landlords contracted to share equally in the division of crops and profits. In reality, sharecropping as practiced in Georgia and the other southern states in the early 1900s was a short step up from enslavement. According to Professor Cruz, black farmers were seldom given itemized accountings, were seldom allowed to know the price at which the crops they raised were sold by the landlords, were forced to accept the landlord's figures for supplies received, and dared not question the honesty of the accounting. Thus, black farmers usually found themselves deeper and deeper in debt every year, regardless of how few supplies they used or how high the price of cotton or corn. I've always said that sharecropping was the basis or the blueprint for the music industry. You have an artist who does 90% of the labor, but you also have a record label who gives 90%, if not 100% of the resources. So they give you these resources on loan. And how much you use is never as much. I mean, it's always more. It's always more than how much you bring in, right? So in the record industry, they'll give you an advance. You have to pay that advance back. Oftentimes, unless you're a special act, you don't always have the money to cover those expenses. And we've seen it with different artists, with different acts over the years. But sharecropping kind of functioned in the same way. They would let the the black people live on the land. They would let them use their tools. They would let them do the work, and then they would charge them for it. Right? They would be like, "Well, this is how much you owe. This is how much you owe for using those tools. This is how much you owe for living in that hut." And it's never like he said. It always surpasses the amount that they use. Always, or is never surpassed um, by the amount that they exert out, right? By the work that they do, what they produce, what they've used always passes what they produce. That's what I'm trying to say, y'all. But you see that the littles, what I liked or what I want y'all to pay attention to was there was a reason why little family members could be somewhat bolder in their dealings with whites than most of their neighbors. That was their freedom from total economic dependence on white exploiters. That is a direct line to the acceptance and the belief of what Marcus Garvey said. Marcus Garvey said in one of his books that I read, a race that is economically dependent on another race will perish. And that's much like what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us, right? accept accept our own and be ourselves. So when we accept our own, we cling on to each other. We begin, like I read in the FBI file, it talked about unity. We begin to unify. That's why unity is such a threat to the mainstream, right? Because if we unify, then we can get around to going back to building economically. We can go get around to creating things for ourselves. I don't know where you brothers and sisters are But I would say this first and foremost, before I forget, make sure you like and subscribe. Like and subscribe, share this video, send it to your friends. Please like and subscribe. And also go over to Lead with Logic 7. Pick up one of these handy dandy nice shirts. We got t-shirts, we got hoodies, we got all that good stuff over there. But again, like and subscribe. But yeah, that unity is huge. And Honorable Elijah Muhammad, all black leaders who were producers, who were producing intelligent and productive black people were telling us you have to separate and you have to build for yourself economically. And so the littles understood that and they were executing on it, right? They weren't just speaking about it, they were manifesting things, putting things into action. Um, Also, I'm gonna go into a little bit of land ownership. It is merely it is merely enough to repeat the blatant assertion by the leading literary Southern racist Thomas Dixon Jr. that if blacks were not checked, they would become such an economic competitor of the white man that they would have to be massacred. You know, whenever I hear people will say things like when we talk about building, when we talk about coming together, when we talk about really doing something meaningful, putting rubber to the road, people will say, well, they're scared of this, or they're scared of that, or they don't want us to do this, they don't want us to do that. No one's scared of an economically bereft people. If you don't have any resources, why am I scared of you? I'm not. That's what, the littles understood. You know, if blacks were not checked, they would become such an economic competitor of the white man that they would have to be massacred. What they don't want is us to become economically competitive. And we're not economically competitive today because most of our money goes out of our community. That's why our communities are bereft of the resources that they have naturally. It's funny to me because in America, we're in the same condition that our African brothers and sisters are in, right? We have the money. We have trillions of dollars that circulates through our community, but we squander it and give it away. That's the same. Isn't that the same? Isn't that the same condition that Africa is in? Isn't that what happens in Africa? They have resources, natural resources, uranium, chocolate, rubber. I mean, all kind of diamonds. They have everything in Africa. But the West comes in, the Europes, the Frances, the UK, they come in, the French, you know what I mean? These places come in and they steal, the Belgium, they take, and they leave the continent bereft of any type of hope, of any type of wealth, of any type of advancement, you know. So yeah, man. So it talks about this too. This is what I was gonna say. It talks about traps. The littles, by slowly and quietly purchasing land of their own, skillfully avoided the the sharecropping trap, which Ma said, Ma is Ella. This is Rodnell Collins. It's her son talking. So anytime I say Ma, I'm speaking about, he's talking about his mother, who was Ella Collins. Ma said was as brutal a system of economic exploitation and control as existed anywhere in the world of that time. There were so many littles that by working together, they were able to hold on to their land and grow enough crops to survive. A second trap they avoided was abandoning the land and move to northern cities during the Great Migration of the 1920s. Now, people, when you look up the Great Migration, what was going on? It was the lynch era, so black people were being lynched unjustly for just menial things. If you think what they did to Emmett Till was bad during the lynch era during the 19, I would say from 1919 all the way up to really 1960. But again, the closer you get to 1919, the more visceral and vicious and violent it is. The incidents you'll read are. But they avoided moving to the northern cities. What I would ask you guys to do is talk to some of your relatives that were around back then and ask them how people were living up north. Were they really living good? Were they living better than what they had been living in the South? Because when I go to a lot of cities, man, it's not a lot of space, right? People are living on top of each other. So you can imagine what it was in those times. When you people don't retire and move to the north or to the Midwest. People retire and come down south. It's green, it's spacious, and it's a bit peaceful. So for them in this time period to understand the benefit and the depth of holding on to land in the South, like one of my big brothers, and I'm gonna have him on, big brother Ghazi Muhammad. That's my brother. I love that brother. He gave a talk, he gave a lecture at the Arc here in Atlanta, and he discussed how so many children of white landlords are wanting to get away from their rural homes, and so they're selling them at dirt cheap prices. That's something for you guys to look into wherever you are. Look at rural areas because I tell you, people are moving into rural areas anyway, right? But nonetheless, Brother Ghazi was talking about how a lot of land is available because these people are abandoning the land because they don't see the profit, they don't see the good and how the land can help them and how the land can empower them. Land is a commodity that's not regenerative. Once land is gone, it's gone. So for the littles to see the significance of holding on to land in an era that was so violent, that was so hostile, and so unbearable for black people, that says they had some supreme wisdom and understanding, supreme knowledge, wisdom and understanding, and some very supreme insight. So the next thing, so that land ownership, but also Garvey implications, right? It says this: it is merely enough to repeat the blatant assertion by the leading itinerary. Oh, I'm sorry, I already put that. I already told y'all that. Nonetheless, it says the black migrants having little, if any, knowledge of how the property tax system worked, too often failed to pay taxes on the land they still owned in the South. State officials gleefully claimed the land and sold it cheaply to whites. Several million acres of land were lost by black folks this way, but the Littles held on. Many members of the family moved north, but many others stayed behind and held on to the land. When Uncle Malcolm later spoke of the critical importance of land ownership, he was echoing the philosophy of some of his little ancestors. So they saw the relevance of it and they understood the significance of land. We have to teach our kids the significance of land because that's a commodity, like I said, that's not regenerative. Once it's gone, it's gone. And once it's gone, then it'll be at an all-time premium because people need land, people want land, people are fighting for land. People are having their land stole from them. Yeah. So this talks a little bit. This next one talks a little bit about Malcolm, some of his ancestors, some of his relatives when he was in Boston, who he was affiliated with, and who he was dealing with. Aunt Gracie and Aunt Sass, when speaking about this, made it clear that much of the land was not lost because of negligence on the part of black owners, but because of conniving white supremacists who seldom missed a trick that would aid them in their efforts to keep African Americans economically powerless and dependent. That's the goal right there. As long as we're powerless and dependent, they don't care how many of us kill each other, they don't how tough we are. They don't care how many of us play in the NBA, NFL. They don't care how many of us make it to be Supreme Court justice. As long as you guys are not, as long as y'all are economically powerless and dependent, then we have you where we got you where we want you. Now we're gonna eat you. One of their most insidious gambits was to illegally intercept mail sent home by blacks who had fled north. Often the mail contained money being sent to relatives for the purchase of food and clothes and to pay property taxes. Being unfamiliar with the checks and money orders, the senders had no qualms about putting cash in their letters and packages. On Sass said that white supremacists, postal officials, and others who knew of this practice would often open the mail and remove the cash. Since they or their allies were in total control, and since they knew that most black folks were too intimidated by terrorists to even complain about their thievery, they had no fear about violating federal laws. Yeah, once Ulysses, I think it was Grant, I want to say it was Grant, once he pulled out, they compromised in the South. That's when KKK rose. That's when a whole bunch of things start happening. So, so yeah, so yeah, it goes into a little bit more. I want to talk about Malcolm's demeanor, or at least how it was described. According to Clifford Green, one of Uncle Malcolm's teenage friends, Malcolm was not one to go out seeking fights. He would never put up his dukes, just would not fight. Like many other intelligent people, Uncle Malcolm, whenever possible, sought to outthink and outmaneuver enemies rather than directly confront them. So Malcolm had an understanding of the psychology of people, right? He understood that just because you might have beat a person up, that doesn't mean you want them, and that doesn't mean that they won't come back another day. Or you could just make an ally out of them. He understood how to do that. So that is the first installment of the literary files. Like I said, this is just part one. And what I'm going to do is I am going to sign off of here. I'm gonna sign off, and you guys are gonna have to get back with me next time. So, as Mr. Malcolm says, may we one day meet in the light of understanding. Peace and love, y'all.